Got it. With my wife's from the Ukraine. All right. Editor from now. So on the show today, Gary Kraftsow. So Gary is an extremely experienced yogi, coming from a lineage that people may well have heard of, and we'll discuss that. Known for work with yoga therapy, for Viniyoga, just one of the people that's best thought of in the yoga world. So super happy to have you on the show today, Gary.
Thanks, Mark. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
How did you get interested in the body? What was your story?
Well, this is an almost embarrassing story, but people somehow are amused by it. I was, when I was a kid, I was in gymnastics in high school. And I did a lot of sailing as well. And when I went to college, I was signed up for a class on Buddhism in the religious studies department my freshman year. And for the phys ed requirement, I took a yoga class. And the woman who was teaching the yoga class was the wife of the chairman of the music department, and he was an ethnomusicologist, and they had lived in Madras, which is now called Chennai, in South India from the 1960s. And in 1974, well, I made a great connection. And the embarrassing story is that after I came out of my first asana class in the phys ed department at Colgate University in 1974, I think I had the best bowel movement that I ever had in my life. I never said that publicly in this forum, but there it is. And I was like, wow, there's something here. And in gymnastics, I had hurt my low back a little bit. And I could see with asana that my back got better and it seemed to influence my digestion. And so 6 months after I took that class, the teacher's husband was taking a group of music students to a study abroad in Madras in South India. And she invited me, and we arranged coursework at Madras University, where I was studying a form of Shaivite tantra called Shaivite Siddhanta. And I met Krishnamacharya and Deśikācar. And this was in 1974. And that began in September of 1974. I met them and began my studies of yoga with them, and then was studying Shaivite Siddhanta Tantra at Madras University. So it began that way. And from 1974, that's been my life path.
Wow. Okay. And was there a moment where it really hooked you? Something special happened, or was it just a series of accumulations of, good shits and good meals and gradually realizing it was a positive thing?
Yeah, well, actually, the thing that happened to me even before the bowel movement is because the previous semester I was in a Hinduism course at the religious studies department, and for the phys ed requirement I took a karate course. I loved the Hinduism course, but I didn't appreciate I wasn't interested in the karate course. So that was the next semester that I took Buddhism and yoga. It was kind of reversed. But when I was in the Hinduism course, I encountered Patanjali. And so for me, the moment that I saw Patanjali, I just felt a connection, and that was the beginning. And then when it was followed up by the bowel movement and the invitation to go to India, it just seemed like the natural choice. And so really from that moment on, when I went to India, I felt like both I was walking through pages of National Geographic. Remember, I was 19 years old back then. So it was very strange, but at the same time, I felt like I was home. And so I really had a good connection, a close connection with Krishnamacharya and Deśikācar, and felt happy and home and seen and supported. And so really from that very first meeting in September 74, it was pretty set. That was my journey was going to be.
And these names, Krishnamacharya and Deśikācar, are very well known in the yoga world, but our listeners are kind of a broad mix. Some are dancers, or therapists, or things like that. So could you say a little bit about those people?
Well, I can say a little bit about them. Yes, Krishnamacharya was an extraordinary human being. He came from a family of yogis, and they were from a particular lineage called Vishishtadvaita. It's a form of Vaishnavism, which is a form of what we sort of, as a misnomer, call in the West Hinduism. And he was very important in that lineage of Vishishtadvaita. His ancestors were very famous scholars and yogis and actually saints. I won't go into all that technical detail here, probably, unless there's some you want me to. But so he was, his father was his guru, but then his father died when he was young, and he went north and became a scholar. He got multiple degrees, what we would call PhDs, multiple degrees at Benares Hindu University. He helped the British viceroy who had diabetes, who helped him get into Tibet. And he met his yoga master at Kailash in Manasarovar at the Lake of the Mind in 1907 or something like that, long ago. And lived in a cave with this guru for 7 years, and then came back down and had a family and began, teaching yoga. And one of his famous students is Mr. Iyengar, BKS Iyengar, and other students like Pattabhi Jois and his son Deśikācar and Ramaswamy and many famous yoga people from the last generation were students of Krishnamacharya. So he was one of the great leaders of yoga in India in the past 200 years, and very well revered and respected. And his son Deśikācar was raised by him, began studying yoga as a young boy, but then when he was a young man, they sent him to engineering school. So he had a Western science background in engineering, but really was dedicated to his father's work. And in particular, his father's work as a yoga therapist. It captured his interest. And so he left after 1 or 2 years of working as an engineer. He left that career and dedicated the rest of his life to the study and teaching and training of teachers and therapists of yoga and yoga therapy.
Yeah, maybe you could say a little bit about what yoga therapy is. So it's a term that some will know and some won't.
That's a big discussion, of course. But yoga therapy is a subset of yoga. It's an ancient form of healing that grew along with Ayurveda. Both Ayurveda and yoga therapy are sister sciences. Maybe the mother is considered to be yoga in the tradition. There's actually a story that associates Patanjali, who is the source of the Yoga Sutras, or the author who composed the Yoga Sutra text, and that Charaka, who is the author who composed the text called Charaka Samhita, which is the source text in Ayurveda, that they're the same being. So Patanjali, Charaka, yoga therapy, Ayurveda, they all kind of grew together. But it's got yoga therapy is more like, in a sense, Ayurveda, in that it has short-term goals, like helping people with structural issues or physiological conditions or psycho-emotional conditions manage their own symptoms and optimize their potential, where the classical yoga is much more about awakening, self-realization, or God realization.
And yoga therapy is often done one-on-one, right? So someone might come to a yoga therapist and say, hey, I've got a digestive problem. Maybe you could help me relax, or...
Yes, well, I mean, traditional yoga therapy is classic, is done one-on-one. There are also therapeutic groups that can be useful when you work with either a specific demographic, for example, a group of kids who have ADHD, or you work with, for example, a condition-specific, a group of asthmatics or recovering from heart attack or breast cancer survivors. So there are some benefits of doing therapeutic groups, but classically, yoga therapy is adapted to the individual, most effectively adapted to the individual.
How's that landing in the West? Because obviously the yoga situation here is pretty different from the one you first studied in the 70s in India. The kind of modern yoga scene is quite something. It's quite wonderful and terrifying at the same time, is how I find it. But how's the...
Well, that's certainly another kind of discussion, isn't it? But yoga therapy has made significant inroads into the West because of the good work of many people who have dedicated themselves to the authentic study of yoga therapy, and then been able to demonstrate through research the effectiveness of yoga therapy in managing symptoms of certain kinds of conditions. And because of that, like, for example, American Viniyoga Institute, which is our organization, has done many studies. First one we did was with the National Institutes of Health in the United States on low back pain. And that was so successful that it got written up in the Annals of Internal Medicine in December of 2005. So that's going back 15 years. That's a serious peer-reviewed medical journal in the United States. We did studies with, using yoga therapy to treat symptoms of patients going through lung cancer treatment. We've done studies that we did with the university. We've done studies with Aetna Insurance Company on stress management. They've all been quite successful. And that's just me in our organization, but many organizations in the West have done effective studies demonstrating the benefits of yoga therapy in helping patients manage their condition and improve their function. And then, the organizations like International Association of Yoga Therapists have done a great job in sort of laying out the scope of a yoga therapist practice, the minimum standards of education, and the core competencies of a therapist. And because of that work, they've also created a peer-reviewed yoga therapy journal. So all of this raises yoga therapy standard of education, and having research is increasing to demonstrate the efficacy of yoga therapy, is increasing its acceptance in the West. It's a long process.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if there will be a full integration of things like meditation and yoga therapy into Western healthcare. Because, as you say, some of these studies have been around a little while. I remember at university reading, studies on the benefits of Zen, and done in the 70s and these kind of things, Japanese universities and Western universities, Kabat-Zinn and yoga therapy, all these studies that have been done. And yet somehow it seems like there's a sort of contradiction. And on the one hand, we do see, for example, the British National Health Service recommending people do yoga, or, I've been teaching doctors to meditate lately, and that, they seem to be taking to it. Things have changed from 10 years ago, certainly. And yet there is still a bit of a clash, isn't there, in terms of the cultures of Western medicine with these practices that are very obviously good for our health.
Well, it's changing. What I have seen in my 40 years of involvement in this tradition is that there's more and more healthcare professionals, medical doctors, mental health professionals, including psychiatrists, and all kinds of other kinds of licensed Western healthcare providers that are themselves studying yoga, that are prescribing yoga to their patients. Now, what there isn't a clear understanding yet, even in the West amongst the yoga community, is the distinction between yoga and yoga therapy. And it's a different skill set. Although yoga therapy is a subset of yoga, it's a different skill set. And people say that, well, yoga is therapeutic, and so therefore I'm a yoga teacher, so therefore I'm a yoga therapist. And I think that that's a misunderstanding of the tradition of yoga therapy. It's got distinct teachings and practices and texts that describe it, and the yoga teacher may offer some therapeutic benefit in their classes, there's no doubt. But someone who's trained as a yoga therapist is trained to work with anybody who is suffering from any kind of condition. And it's not just a matter of teaching asana. So the West hasn't yet fully understood the distinction. There's a growing body of research as yoga therapeutic specific. As far as full integration, I mean, we have clinics in the United States, medical clinics, that are having yoga programs and yoga therapy programs in them now. There are, in medical schools, young medical students in the United States that are now studying yoga. So I think that we're a generation or two away from it being fully accepted. But I think that it's the emphasis on self-care, even with this current national or worldwide crisis we're having with COVID, there's telemedicine. The ability to empower people to manage their own condition, I think, is really important, and yoga therapy have a big role in that. And I think that it's coming. It's not fully integrated yet, but it's coming.
Yeah. And it was just saying before we press record that it was with my cousin who's from the conservative side of my family. Her dad's in the military, and she was open to learning to meditate. And that wasn't just because I was teaching, it was because of the last 20 years. It's because she'd heard of it, she'd seen a study, her friends got an app, whatever it is. And she was open in a way which was really quite lovely. And it's interesting in this COVID situation we're in that it does seem to, well, no, I'm not an expert on it, but it does seem to affect much stronger people who haven't looked after their health. Now, sometimes it's just age, sometimes it seems to be genetic, very random. So I don't want to put everyone in this category, but it certainly seems to, you're more at risk if you have heart disease, if you've got certain stress-related illnesses. And it is underlining, I'm really seeing this narrative a lot, like if you've looked after your health over the last 10, 20, 30 years, it's got a hell of a consequence right now. It was always life and death, but right now it's very obviously life and death.
It brings it more into the forefront of our awareness, the impermanent nature of life, and how important it is for us to engage in practices of self-care and to become independent in managing our own condition. And I think one of the things that, and again, it's all anecdotal now, we don't know yet, but one of the things that seems most important is being able to maintain a healthy respiratory function. And the work with the breath that's implicit in yoga is so important for maintaining, strong respiratory function, ventilation, and perfusion and diffusion. All of that is essential for health and well-being. And so, yeah, I think that self-care is important, and this current crisis is only shedding more light on how important it is.
Yeah, it's underlining our mortality as a kind of collective death meditation, is how we were discussing it on another podcast, while simultaneously underlining how much self-care work we've done. I put on a bit of weight from a few years ago, and I'm kind of regretting it now. It's like I'm not quite as fit as I was 5 years ago.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated, the reality and the information isn't all clear yet, but clearly obesity and diabetes and kidney disease and heart conditions and respiratory conditions are complicating factors for anyone who's infected with this COVID.
Gary, what do you think of this? I've seen a number of yoga teachers offer sort of breathing techniques to help the respiratory system with sort of COVID very much in the fore. And I've got very mixed feelings about it, because it does seem to be in most cases very well intended, that they're offering something they think is beneficial. But then on the other hand, maybe it's not quite so evidence-based. Maybe it's a little bit opportunistic. Like I'm not sure what to feel about it. Do you know the kind of thing I'm talking about?
Well, I do. And I think that, so there's a science in yoga that's called pranayama. And so much, when people think about yoga in the West, for the most part, and of course, this is a generalization and not everybody, but a large percentage of people who think about yoga associate yoga with asana practice. And then meditation is like something different. But truly, yoga is a multidimensional science that works with the totality of the human system. Asana is a part of it, but a very important part of it is pranayama. However, most of the transmission of yoga from India to the West was made by people that were not experts in yoga, including there are more teachers that have been trained well coming from India in asana, but fewer in pranayama. So already breath knowledge is limited in the yoga community in the West. And of course, people make stuff up. Mm-hmm. So it's a powerful science. There are extraordinary teachings about how to regulate the flow of inhale and exhale, and how to work with the breath in order to influence the autonomic nervous system, respiratory function, cardiovascular rhythms, etc. But they're not well known or understood. So as long as people emphasize just breathing deeply and consistently and working with the breath, but they don't ask them to force the breath, push the breath in a way that makes them uncomfortable, or hold the breath too long after inhale or after exhale, it's probably beneficial. But I think the truth is, a lot of people are just guessing and making things up. Very few yoga teachers have had deep training in the ancient art and science of pranayama, even amongst Indians in India.
What are you recommending to people right now then? If they were said, hey, can you offer me some breath work practices right now? I'm worried about my respiratory health.
Yes, I can say some things about it. The first thing that I did was offer to our graduates, people that have been studying Viniyoga, which means they've been doing breath-centric asana as opposed to form-centric asana for many years. And they've been practicing pranayamas for many years. I offered them a very specialized, we call it a kind of a double breathing krama technique that's specific for people who are experienced in breath work. I wouldn't give it to the public. To increase self-confidence, increase courage, strengthen the system, and let's say, we hope, support immune function. But for the general public, I'm offering two kinds of online streamed classes. One is we call pranayama brahmana, and the others we call pranayama langana. So brahmana is, again, to increase strength, self-confidence, courage, and support energy and vitality. And then the other, that's brahmana, and the other, langana, is more about managing stress, supporting deep relaxation, and finding a kind of peace and stillness, sympathetic, parasympathetic balance. And so what I would recommend for people who are trained in breath work, if they haven't been, I encourage them to go out and find someone who really understands the breath work, not making it up, but have been trained and have years of practice. Then learn how to use the breath in these two ways. One, to build energy, to strengthen the system, to support immune function, to increase self-confidence and courage in the face of the unknown. And that may be something useful to do in the morning, for example. And the other is to manage stress, calm the nervous system, promote deep relaxation, and help to create a state of peace. And that would be langana. That could be done more in the later afternoon or the early evening. So I definitely recommend to our community regular daily breath practices, sometimes even twice a day. And we have this online, Viniyoga in Viniyoga.com, you can see on our website on the front page, like a bar that's online live streaming. I'm doing 2 classes a week on breath work and then 1 class a week on meditation. They're only 30-minute classes, specifically because of what's going on right now. So I think breath is very important, and everybody should be encouraged to learn it, practice it safely, don't force the breath, and get some education about it if they can.
Thank you. Just making a note on my phone. I'll check one of those out at the weekend when I've got a couple of days off. So appreciate it. By the way, if you see me tapping on my phone, I'm not texting anyone. I'm taking notes. So I forgot to tell you that.
That's quite all right.
Okay. I mean, I know your view of yoga from listening to past interviews is much broader than asana or even just breath work. So in terms of psychology, in terms of how we look at life and death, I mean, this seems very relevant now.
So, yeah, it's kind of like, in America, there was a television show called Mission Impossible. I don't know if it came to the UK or wherever you are, whoever's listening to this, but I remember when I was in India, somehow Deśikācar knew about it and knew about the phrase Mission Impossible. And he used to joke with me, this is in the late 1970s, that my mission impossible would be to teach yoga in the West, that yoga is not just asana. The tradition of yoga is arguably let's say that one of the source texts from which a lot of the yoga teachings are drawn, besides, for example, Yoga Sutras. There are many texts. One of them is called the Taittiriya Upanishad, in which the human system is modeled as multidimensional. This is what we sort of popularly thought of in the West as the Panchamaya Kosha model. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the technical details about that, but it's arguably the most ancient holistic model of the human system. When I bring these teachings into the context of Western healthcare, like a couple of years ago, I was asked to do a talk to a leadership forum in healthcare providers at Cleveland Clinic. And I represented it more using Western ideas. So we have a structure, our physical structure, our anatomy. That means the spine, the shoulder girdle, arms, pelvic girdle, legs. The ancients conceived of the practice of asana very much in relationship to the functional anatomy. to help us achieve strength, stability, range of motion, symmetry in the musculature, and functional movement patterns. But we also, more important in a way, I sometimes ask students, just as a sort of provocation, what's more important after all, your hamstrings or your liver? So in a way, asana is to hamstrings what pranayama, breath-centric asana, and pranayama is to the liver. That is, we have this physiological system, and the breath work is, the ancients conceived of breath work, breath in asana and pranayama to help us sort of link to our physiology via the autonomic nervous system and being able to create states of sympathetic, parasympathetic balance. Most of our suffering is physiological conditions and emotional conditions. There's a state of sympathetic, parasympathetic dysregulation. And if we understand breath work, it's a sympathetic, parasympathetic regulator. And actually, if you study pharmacology, most of the pharmacology that's prescribed for managing symptoms of chronic disease are also sympathetic, parasympathetic regulators. So we're not just a structure, but we're also a physiology. So the joke is, what's more important, your hamstrings, your liver? But the next question is, what's more important, your liver or your attitude, your emotions? So the ancients conceived of the science of chanting and meditation to help us understand and transform our minds, manage our emotions, start to become aware of the stories we're telling ourselves about ourselves and the world around us, change our stories, root out our patterns, and actually become free. So they offered the science of asana, pranayama, chanting, and meditation, and then specialized inner practices to help the human being manage the totality of who they are in order to eliminate suffering and causes of suffering, and in order to achieve happiness and well-being and find a meaning and purpose in this life and prepare for end of life. And that's the sort of broader perspective of the yoga tradition. And, I feel like it's important that the community understands that yoga is much more than exercise, that asana is a small part of yoga, and that all of these tools are useful for all human beings to understand and transform themselves. And one other thing I'll say about this is, I feel like there's been a sort of a misunderstanding in certain segments of the community that yoga is about the methods, like it's about the asana. And I want to make sure that from the perspective of the way I was learned, of course, because I can only speak from my training and my experience, but it's not about the asanas. The asanas are just tools to serve practitioners. The asana has no value other than the value it serves you as an individual when you're practicing it. It's not about the pranayama techniques. It's not about the meditations. It's not even about the mantras. These are tools to help you understand and transform yourself. The practices are about the practitioner, not the practices. So people have become sort of turned the practices into icons that they worship, rather than recognizing that they're just tools to help them in their own personal experience transform and actualize on this life's journey.
Wonderful, wonderful. Lots there then. So, yoga, the word, it's almost a linguistic confusion. Is it yoga as the goal and the state rather than simply the thing that gets you there? Yeah.
Well, it's kind of paradoxical, right? Yoga as sadhana, it's a practice and tools to help you transform, but then it's as state, a siddhi, as the state of accomplishment. Yes.
Right. There's
it's linguistic confusion.
Double meaning, isn't there, with it? And then this Western versus Eastern thing of like, if there's a problem, the Western approach is to look at it physically and fix it externally. So, okay, someone's got an illness. Okay, let's put a drug in them and get rid of that illness as a physical solution to a physical problem. And then there's a sort of Buddhist or some, many Eastern schools say, look, the problem isn't the physical thing, it's your attitude. Because you can have a pain and be fairly non-attached to it and not be suffering particularly. Just like, okay, I know this from the martial arts. We quite a lot of pain, but there's not a lot of suffering. It's just like, okay, that hurts and it's not really a problem. It's just pain. You learn to detach those two things and, develop that mental, spiritual attitude of detachment. And then, of course, yoga combines those two with physical health practices and the psychological, emotional, and also looking at psycho-emotional causes. So it's not just the psycho-emotional solutions like, Buddhist non-attachment or detachment, but also the fact that looking at, okay, if you're angry a lot, that's going to impact your liver or your heart rate or all those things. So for me, that's it's kind of how I look at it, is looking at it from those angles in terms of causes and solutions, physical and less physical, but bearing in mind.
I think that's very well said. I mean, one of the great insights that's rooted in the sort of the metaphysical foundation of yoga, which comes from the tradition called Sankya, again, a more technical discussion, is just pointing to the reality of change in the material world. And our physical lives are manifest in the material world. And change is happening, and the yogis recognize that we can influence the direction of change by the application of the appropriate method. That we need intelligence and a training and understanding of the appropriate methods to influence the direction of change. So it's not just that we accept whatever is, but we can set a direction for our own futures, for our own condition that can influence our structure, our physiology, and our minds, and set a direction for what we're going to do over the next X number of years that we have in this life. So it's not just reaching that state of accepting whatever, it's about influencing change and setting a direction for our own future.
Now, is that sounds like a very American taking self-responsibility, which by the way I love, rather than a lot of more Indian things I've come across a bit more fatalistic. So
this teaching comes from Krishnamacharya and Deśikācar.
Uh-huh.
One of the things Deśikācar told me when I was in my early 20s was the mind sets a direction for the future. And one of the great definitions of yoga from Gita is that yoga is skill in action, and that you can, through the application of intelligence, influence the direction of change in your lives. And that's part of what we're taught to do. And this is not just an American idea. This came directly from India.
Sure. I'm not suggesting it didn't come from your teachers. I'm just suggesting that culturally, there's measures for how much personal responsibility is taken on, even between, say, Germany and the US. There's a big difference there, and I like to hear this in the kind of, it's in the yoga tradition as well, because often I hear this sort of it's your karma, it's a kind of fatalistic kind of vibe.
The cliche that Satchidananda, I think, made it famous in the West, is the hardest asana is standing on your own feet.
Mm-hmm.
And what the teaching of yoga is, it's svatantra. You have to walk your own path. And that, what you want to do is be empowered to engage in your own practice, to influence your own condition, and to set a direction for the rest of your own lives. What you choose to do now will influence what happens to you tomorrow. This basic karma, teachings of karma.
And also, you said there that as the methods in some ways aren't so important, not to get too attached to those, then it can be different things for different people, different times in their life. And now we're actually given this huge profusion of methods. Like, just very practically, I have a day off for the weekend. I thought I'll do a yoga class, one of these new online ones. Maybe I'll check out Gary's, or Max Strom's got a good breathwork class I might want to check out. And there's this huge profusion of possibilities now. I'm spoilt for choice. So how does one choose in this supermarket of possibilities?
So that reminds me of one of these great minds that I used to read when I was younger that influenced my own life was Søren Kierkegaard. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he used a phrase in one of his books called Sickness Unto Death, the despair of infinite possibility.
Right.
Actually, it wasn't in Sickness Unto Death, but that's not important. But it was Kierkegaard, the despair of infinite possibility. And I think that there's a challenge to yoga students to try to seek out authentic teachings, because there is a lot of made up stuff. And it doesn't mean that made up stuff isn't good. I don't want to say that, but there's a lot of stuff that isn't as good as it could be. Maybe some of it isn't good at all, or isn't even safe. There are practices that are not advisable. And so I think it's a challenge for the student of yoga to qualify their yoga teachers, but I think it's an important thing to do, to find teachers that have authentic training. And then ultimately you have to be the judge for yourself. You only can ultimately know by doing the practices and feeling their benefit in your own life and your own experience. But I do think that, especially now with social media and everybody sort of just self-promoting as authorities on yoga, it's harder for the uneducated student to know where to begin.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's both a benefit and a deficit. So I the responsibility, unfortunately, now is on the student to qualify their teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the choice just multiplied. It just in the last month. In the last month, the majority of yoga teachers have now gone online. I helped about 4,000 of them myself in some classes we did. How to use Zoom and this kind of thing. And the difference just is that now online I can study with everyone that's got a class, not just the 10 yoga teachers in my little town kind of thing.
Right.
The choice has just multiplied exponentially in terms of this new online environment, which is both wonderful and like, oh my God, I found myself just doing the online classes of the teachers that I already knew the last few weeks. So I went, I have a relationship with that person. I know what I'm going to get. I know they're solid. It was almost a sort of retreat to a slightly conservative point of view of just, I'll just stick with their class. And
yeah, well, it's important to think about why you want to do the yoga in the first place and understand what you're looking for, how it can serve you, and then find classes that are addressing the issues that are concerning to you.
Yeah.
But if it's just entertainment, and then that's a different story. I mean, if it's not ultimately serious.
And as you said, it's different motivations, aren't there? I heard you in another interview make this nice distinction between, are you just doing it for fun or some worldly gain, like to meet a girl or a boy? Are you for fitness? Are you doing it to actually to alleviate your suffering, or is it some kind of transcendent motivation?
Yeah.
And then the motivations of the teachers as well. Like, are they more like a fitness coach who's just trying to help you with something simple, or are they actually taking you for a ride? There's something malintended there.
Or just maybe not malintended, but just a lack of understanding on their own, and then just making stuff up. I think that's the greatest deficit, or not deficit, that's the greatest thing that we're seeing in the proliferation of, I don't want to call it the diarrhea of yoga online, but forgive me for saying that, please. But people just don't know what they don't know. And they think that they can figure it out and just make it up. And I've seen that, and I've been, like I said, over 40, maybe 45 years I've been in this yoga field, and I've seen all kinds of people make stuff up that really didn't receive those teachings, weren't initiated in a lineage of transmission. This idea of lineage has less and less maybe meaning to the broader community, but traditionally, teachings that were worthy of transmitting generationally were passed from teacher to student. And when the student understood and was able to teach it, then they began teaching it. They weren't teaching for making a living and just sort of, they were initiated to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's changed.
I think it's valid to be an innovator. I myself consider myself an innovator rather than someone in a lineage. And I think it's important to know which you're getting. Like, is this an authentic lineage, and is this person really qualified, or is this person an innovator and it hasn't been tested in that way, but it might have a different freshness to it? So
look,
advantages and disadvantages of both.
I want to be clear. I think that I believe in innovation and creativity, and I think that great things come, new things come. People I don't want to use the word channel exactly, but people have deep insight who maybe didn't have a teacher and can offer something of great value. I'm not disputing that. I agree with that. So it's hard, again, to find either an authentic, time-tested yoga teaching and practice that's going to work, or a creative genius that may be more modern, new, without any antecedents that's really effective. They're both possible. So ultimately, the practitioner has to be the judge, and understanding what they're looking for, why they're coming to these practices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I find myself looking with teachers as much for their motivation as how effective the method is or the lineage. That's the kind of thing I'm really looking out for with teachers now. And if I get a sort of sense and evidence for their motivation being kind of well intended, and there's at least some quality to their training, that's normally the thing I'm looking for these days.
Yeah, that's sweet. To understand, like, why are you offering this? There's some people that their life is about yoga and they're trying to make a living doing it. And there's some people that are interested in making money and they're going to use yoga to make money. And I think there's a big difference between the yoga teacher who has to support themselves and tries to do a good business and make, good offerings to their clientele, and the people that have a business orientation primarily and they want to make money and they think, oh, yoga, there's a lot of people into that. Let's use yoga to make money.
I don't see in the UK anyway so many using yoga to make money because it's quite difficult to, but I definitely see it as a way of getting self-esteem and a certain status or power. That's the thing I see as the most seductive hook in the yoga world here, is I get to tell people what to do and I get to be looked up to as a slightly better than average spiritual type person. I think that's the worldly seduction in the UK, at least, rather than money. It's difficult to make a good living from it in the UK.
Yeah, that's a bit of a trap, isn't it? Yeah. And if you get yourself in a position where people are looking to you for teaching, you better have something to deliver.
Is it something you'd like to clear up? Like, we have a few thousand people listening, if you could clear up one thing about how yoga is generally considered, what would be the thing you'd clarify?
Wow. Well, I've already said a few things, but I think there are two main points. One is that yoga is a tool to help individuals understand and transform themselves at a multidimensional level. It's not one thing. It's not just about your structure. It's about your structure. It's about your physiology. It's about our emotions. It's about our narrative and the stories we're telling ourselves about ourselves. And it's about setting a direction for the future. And, well, I'll say that in a minute. And so let's see, that's important. And that all of these tools are about and for you as a human being who was born, who grows, who lives, who declines, and who dies. And yoga is a science and a tool to help us on our life journey from birth to death. And my teacher told me when I was 19 years old that the purpose of yoga is to prepare for the moment of death. And then he told me a story from the Puranas, which I won't say now unless you want me to. But, he just told me that this yoga is a tool that's for you on your whole life journey. It's not one thing. It's not about practices. It's about understanding and transformation, and then preparing for end of life, so that when you reach end of life, you'll feel at peace, fulfilled, and maybe open and curious about what's going to happen next.
That does seem particularly pertinent in these times. The British death toll from COVID is the highest it's ever been in a day today. And looks like I think the American one yesterday that I saw was equally the highest it had been, and looks like it's still rising. That curve's not totally flattening. So, let me play devil's advocate a bit. Well, someone says, what use is yoga when there's a pandemic? I mean, okay, stress levels, breathing health, okay, great, but it's too late for that, What use is your yoga at this time? What would you say?
Well, I mean, it depends on why, what someone's experiencing. If someone has a back pain, yoga can help them relieve the back pain. If somebody isn't sleeping well, yoga can help them sleep. If someone has anxiety and fear, yoga can help them find strength, courage, and peace. If someone is losing loved ones, yoga can help them have a more balanced perspective about the loss. If someone is facing their own death, yoga is a tool to help us prepare for end of life. So there's not one answer to that. It depends. But it's not about the yoga. It's about helping you find relief or peace, depending upon what you're looking for. So if someone has got despair because of the end, yoga can help them find a sense of meaning and purpose in however many days they have left. If you're really at end of life, then yoga can help you find that openness and acceptance and gratitude for the life, and or link, if you're a religious person, link to sources of inspiration, link to the divine. So there's not one answer to that, because it just depends. But yoga can be useful for anybody, for whatever reason. that they're suffering or whatever they're looking for. I don't know if I'm copping out on your question.
No, I like it. And an image came to mind as suffering as like a weed. And it's like where you could cut off the top, you can deal with some of the symptoms, or you could go right down to the root of this idea of like the fear of death, which is there underneath all the other fears, right? It's almost like, and certain people can just cut the top of the weed off, and other people can cut it right down to the base, and other people, due to their nature, their training, their culture, all these different things, can really uproot that son of a bitch and be like, okay, there's the real root of the suffering.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, look, that's what you were saying earlier about yoga being, both a means and the goal. Yoga is both helping deal with transient things like fixing a back pain, or sleeping better, or improving digestion, or managing stress, and yoga about self-realization. I mean, ultimately, you are not this, according to the yogic metaphysics or view, you are not these changing conditions in your body. And if you're identified with your body looking and feeling a certain way, you're in big trouble, because this body is compost, it's impermanent. So the ultimate teaching of yoga, rather than specifically yoga therapeutic ways of managing conditions, is to help people understand who they truly are. And the yoga view, of course, coming out of the sort of Vedic tradition, is the unchanging source of pure awareness. You are that Atman, the unchanging source of consciousness or pure awareness itself, and help people get rooted in that. Because if they identify with their changing conditions, they're doomed to suffer, because things are going to change and this body is going to end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That would be going to the deepest root, of course. The
deepest root there is, yeah. One of my first ever jobs was being a gardener, so I paid my way through university, and I'd get given a garden, and someone would say, "Hey, I've got £200. What can you do?" And I'd say, "Well, for £200, I can get rid of the weeds, but if I work another 2 days, I can get rid of the roots of the weed."
Right.
You got
and that's an important image in yoga, because I lived in Hawaii for 30 years, and the soil that I lived in was very like clay. And there was a very pernicious grass called kukui grass, and you couldn't pull it out. You had to dig it up and turn the roots and expose the roots to the sun in order to get rid of them. And that's such a metaphor for what yoga's teaching is. Most of our suffering is connected to our conditioning. And it's only the light of the sun, which the Vedic people call Chid-Jyoti, the light of consciousness, that can help us become free of that conditioning. So it's a good image. We use the image of gardening all the time.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't thought about that job for years. Interesting that came up today. You're spending more time walking around parks than normal, trying to get outside and get a bit of fresh air and exercise.
Here where I live, the parks are closed.
Oh, well, we're still allowed to walk. We're allowed to exercise once a day, and I take that to mean a 3-hour walk. So I go for a long walk every day and out in the sun, and do my coaching calls on the phone and lie on the grass to get a bit of stress relief. That's one of my favorite stress relief activities, lying on the ground. I'm definitely seeing all the change that's going on for people, that essentially everyone's had their life changed. Everyone's had some kind of loss. And for some people, that's a huge loss, like a death. For other people, it's not being able to see their girlfriend, or not being able to see their elderly parent, or not being able to go to the pub. Everyone's had some, it's not been
or economic loss.
Huge economic loss for so many people. A lot of yoga teachers out there that I know have really suffered and, tried to turn quickly into something else. But it seems to me that when things are changing rapidly, the ability to be okay with the new thing, to be unattached to the old thing, is the skill for reducing suffering. Like, I can try and get chocolate from another shop, right? I can try and say, well, I can't see my friends, but maybe I can phone them, and that's great, and we can phone them instead of see each other. But the key skill, way deeper than any of those external fixes, is, can I be okay with loss?
Yeah. I mean, we call the word that we use a lot in yoga therapy is resilience. To have the resilience so that you can face change and accept change and not lose your equilibrium or your balance. And that happens as you practice and become more rooted in who you truly are, that isn't changing. Mm-hmm. But because if you're identified with things being the way they are, everybody's going to be going through hell right now, because things are not at all the way they have been. You can't rely on that. So that ability to be resilient in the face of change is one of the gifts of yoga practice. And it's also a measure, if you're doing good practice, and this is something my teacher taught me when I was quite young. If you're doing good practice, you will feel better, you'll sleep better, you'll have more energy, you'll be more tolerant of others, you'll be more compassionate, you'll be less attached materially, and you'll be able to be more balanced and at peace, or have an equanimous mind in the midst of change, especially change that's out of your control. That's a sign of good practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the fruits of practice, in a way, are a judgment of a practice, aren't they? It's like, well, okay, how's my appetite? How's my sleep? How's my relationship? Does this help? When I come back from practice, am I nicer to my wife? Probably. Do I sleep better? Probably. Okay, then there's a few indicators that maybe that's a good class to keep going to.
And yes, exactly. And one of my teachers used to say, your fundamental dharma is to be happy, which was such an interesting idea. Mm-hmm. That a measure of good practice is that you're at peace, that you're happy, that you're content, that you're balanced emotionally, that you have a balanced frame of mind, that you're not telling a story about the world and yourself around. You're not caught in a narrative. And then, of course, that you have more energy in your body, you sleep better, you feel better.
It really inspires something there, that like what's being exposed right now is what people need to be content. Do they need a very particular setup of, I have to get this person and this drug and this status and this money and this, or can they have all that taken away and just be sat at home reading a book or doing their yoga or whatever and still be content? That's a hell of a test that's being applied to everyone right now.
Yeah, and well, that's the measure. That's the way I was taught, that the ability to be still, to be present, to be in kaivalya, he said, means, it's often translated liberation, but it means you're not dependent on external things to find fulfillment, that you're self-reliant.
Yeah. And I've heard this in the stories of people like Nelson Mandela, who are in prison for a long time, or Terry Waite, who was captured in Lebanon, that they were forced to become self-reliant because they had everything taken away. Yeah. Now, in a way, we're being given this opportunity, which is not as extreme as that for most of us. And I know there are people out there who are, really in some bad situations, but for most of us, it's okay. There's food in my fridge, the heating still works, water comes out the taps. It's not Terry Waite. It's not Nelson.
Let's hope it doesn't get worse.
For now. Yeah. But there's still that opportunity to really look at my life and look at my attachments and look at the suffering I'm, causing myself by kind of wanting things to not be different.
Yeah. To me, this is, as you point out, this is the measure of good yoga practice. And that's really what yoga is about. I mean, when my teacher taught me that yoga is about preparing for the end of life, what he meant is recognize that you don't need all the things you think you need to be fulfilled. You don't need your vitality even. You don't need your reproductive potential. You don't need your status in the world. You don't even need anything. You are, to use a Western phrase, you're the child of God. You are the unchanging source of pure awareness. And to get rooted in that is the highest sort of gift of yoga, to be able to rest in that pure awareness and not be dependent on things. And then to have the intelligence to know how to apply methods so that you can fix whatever needs to be fixed. What you can fix, you can fix. So you can, and I think it's important for everyone to stay stable right now in their bodies, in their physiology, and in their emotions, and to work with their respiratory function to maintain that sort of prana vitality. And then to be at peace, to learn the methods of stress reduction and relaxation.
Wonderful. I feel like we did some clarifying in this interview and learned a little bit about you and your work, and ended up in some deep territory there, which I appreciate. Maybe a couple of things to close us out here then. So where do people find out about you and Viniyoga?
Oh, well, thank you for that. And thank you everybody who's listening. We have the website www.viniyoga.com, VINIYOGA.com. And the thing that we're doing that's the most sort of accessible now, although there's articles and books, I've written books published by Penguin and done e-courses on pranayama and meditation and asana and yoga therapy. There are e-courses through Yoga International, but all that's on our website. And I think the thing that we're offering to the community right now are 3 30-minute practices a week. Pranayama and meditation, Brahmana, on Tuesdays, pranayama and meditation, Langana on Fridays, and then what I call the river of life, and it's just really rooted in meditation, that's on Sundays. And they're live streamed, but they're also available on demand. And they're 30-minute practices, and you can experience these Viniyoga teachings in your own personal practice if you're interested.
I will be checking it out myself at the weekend, Gary. So
thank you, Mark. You know, Mark, I'm scheduled still. I haven't changed it to come to London in June. We'll see.
You're there in June. Where are you? Who's hosting you? Where are you going to be?
You know, I'm afraid I don't remember the name of the school right
now. Yoga or
no. Now you're embarrassing me. Hang on, I can tell you. I can tell you.
Look it up.
I just have to open my calendar. But, you know, it's not that it's called Yoga Campus.
Oh, yeah. Yoga Campus are great. I taught there. Yoga Campus really well organized.
And please forgive me, those who heard that I didn't know. It's just somebody else.
I imagine you have a lot of gigs, Gary, I'm sure. Yoga Campus are great, though. They've got a nice place. They're well organized. I've been on course as a participant and as a teacher at Yoga Campus, and really recommend.
I still have my plane ticket, but who knows what's going to happen.
June. It's touch and go.
The last week of June.
Last week of June, I'd say 50-50 from what I've heard.
Yeah.
So that's another possibility. Okay, great.
Well, I wish you well, Mark, and everybody who's listening, stay well and healthy and happy. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Gary.